I think when we're looking at UAE or perceptions of UAE foreign policy, we have to differentiate between what the Turks and the Qataris are saying and what other media outlets are increasingly saying, and the perception among Washington policymakers who continue to see UAE as a valuable ally. And I think the greatest evidence of that is that despite Turkish and Qatari lobbying, the US has yet to call out the UAE on its role in Libya or in Yemen, speaking volumes as to how Washington views the UAE as a vital ally. And it's in this context that we have to view these latest talks between the UAE and Iranian foreign ministers. The region is anticipating that Biden might well win the elections after November, and Biden's headline policy in the region will be a revival of talks with Iran and a potential rapprochement with Iran. That will involve coming to some sort of agreement on Yemen, on Syria and Iraq. In Yemen, UAE has positioned itself whereby no deal can be done without the approval of Abu Dhabi, because the UAE is the prime backer of the STC. So in other words, the UAE will be able to supersede Qatar and Oman, the traditional mediators, by insisting that it is the only power that can push the STC to abide by any agreement, while the Iranians pressure the Houthis. In Syria, the UAE is the only Gulf country that is willing to put up money to help reconstruct Syria, as Biden is likely to launch a bid to try to bring Assad in from the cold and try to lessen his dependency on Russia and on the Iranians. Moreover, as part of the talks, as part of the conditions that might be offered to Iran, UAE will be able to play a mediating role because the economy will be a vital issue in any discussions on Syria. And when it comes to Saudi Arabia, which is the third key dynamic in any US-Iran talks, UAE is the only country that can exert influence on Saudi policy to convince Mohammed bin Salman to align with what Biden wants with regards to talks with Iran, even if that may come at the expense of Saudi Arabia. And this is the context within which we should look at this latest talk between the foreign ministers of UAE and Iran. The UAE is trying to prepare itself so that when Biden pursues his Middle East policy, he will not rely on Qatar, he will not rely on Oman in the way Obama did before, but rather he will rely on Abu Dhabi because of the cards it has and because of its willingness to align with the US interests.